Senator Mark Kirk and look forward to his perspectives on the U.S.-Iran negotiations, which have been so prominently in the newspapers recently. As the Obama administration continues negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program, some members of Congress, including Senator Kirk, have expressed concern over key issues in the negotiations. With June 30, the deadline for the final deal looming, the Senate just last week passed the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. Now in the House for consideration, this act would potentially enable Congress to delay a final decision and temporarily prohibit the president from lifting sanctions on Iran. What will this mean for negotiations? Is there a solution to the Iran nuclear debate that sufficiently satisfies Congress and our allies and all parties in the negotiations? Well, I look forward, and I'm sure you do too, with hearing Senator Kirk's thoughts on these and other themes this afternoon. Now, let me introduce Senator Mark Kirk, who was elected in 2010, sits on 4 committees, that strikes me as quite a few, including the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Senate Banking Committee among the 4. He's the co-author of several bipartisan laws that imposed economic sanctions on Iran, including one in December 2011 that passed the Senate in a 100-0 vote. How many times have we seen that kind of cooperation? Rarely. And prior to the Senate, he served 5 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives and previously worked at the World Bank, the State Department, and served as counsel to the House International Relations Committee. He was also an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve from '89 to 2013 when he retired at the level of commander. Quite a background, quite a resume, and we're delighted to have him here. Senator Clark.
Because this is a Kirk-related event, I have brought homework. Look at your handouts. I'm going to take you through some slides on the Iran issue. If you look at number 1, you'll see the effect of the Menendez-Kirk sanctions on the Iranian economy, which is called the Iranian currency, which is called the rial. You can see February 1st, 2013 was a very bad day for Iran. It's probably the day that the Iranians decided to come to the negotiating table. I have joked that the Iranians were so out of money, they might have had to skip a payment to Hezbollah or 2. Yeah. If you go to number 2, we'll see the effect of these currency sanctions that really tanked the Iranian economy. We were able to send them into a pretty deep recession to generate pressure for the negotiated solution. If you go to number 3, you'll see the heart and soul of the current negotiation. Wendy Sherman, who is the leader of the U.S. delegation, has been arranging to refund some of Iran's money back to them in the tune of $490 million per pay period. She has insisted that the Iranians have a very strong cash flow going back to them for every month that they were in the negotiations. If you look at the bottom of number 3, you'll see that the amount that Wendy has refunded back to Iran is enough to fund Hezbollah for 40 years. Let's go to number 4. You'll see that Iran has been on quite a roll lately. Lindsey Graham, my colleague in the Senate, has said the Iranians now control the Yemeni capital in total. He adds Washington to that. If you look at the Badr organization, the IRGC, which stands for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, you'll see just how successful they have been in Yemen and Baghdad. If you go to number 5, it answers the question, what would a good agreement look like? A good agreement, in my view, would be the agreement that Nelson Mandela signed with the international community to get rid of his 4 nuclear weapons that he had. If you look at North Korea, you'll see The time to zero threat for South Africa is about 17 years. And you'll see under Wendy Sherman, who was the negotiator for President Clinton, that she handled the North Korean negotiations, and that resulted in 4 nuclear detonations. You'll see the dates of those detonations when the North Koreans actually lit off their nuclear weapons. I have told many members of Congress that when they ask, what does a good agreement look like? I have said, if it's good enough for Nelson Mandela, it should be good enough for Ayatollah Rouhani. Let's go to number 6 here. Number 6 outlines the fact that there really is no agreement between the United States and Iran. The Iranians say, when the agreement is signed, all sanctions are lifted, and the United States says, no, it's just a gradual lifting. If you look at the inspection of military sites, the Vice President Biden has said, we get to inspect military sites. The Iranians said, no way, no military sites get inspected by the international regime. Let me go on to number 7 here. The solution, in my view, is to have bipartisan legislation to adopt economic sanctions which put the weight of power on the U.S. side. Think of Iran as a country with a $300 billion economy, and the United States is a country with a $14 trillion economy. When we ask financial institutions to pick between the two, they always pick the U.S. In my case, I've been moving these sanctions on some pretty massive votes, and as a Republican senator, I can say that on the issue of Iran, I have spoken for every single senator, Republican or Democrat, that we have passed these things by unanimous votes and made sure that we move forward on the most critical foreign policy issue of our time in a unanimous way, that I've gotten every single Democrat to support me to make sure that we send a clear message to the president. And looking at old past history, from World War II, we have a choice to make like the United States made in 1938 between war and peace. I choose peace. I think we should have effective sanctions to make sure we do not have a nuclear Iran. And that is to make sure the key goal of my life is achieved, of making sure our kids never have to clean up a nuclear war in the Persian Gulf, and make sure that that horrific future is never part of their life experience. And with that, let me thank you all for listening. That's everybody. Let's open it for questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, Senator Kirk.
All right.
Thank you, and welcome back. You've been talking about Iran on our platform now for 6 years, I believe it is. So you've presented the challenges to the agreement. I was wondering if you could share with us a solution that you think presents more long-term viability than the one that's on the table right now. Could you talk us through that, please?
Sure. The key of my work in the Senate has been to use the economic power of the United States to achieve a non-military result that is advantageous to us. After the war in Iraq, we have seen the president largely won on war weariness, $1 trillion in Iraq. To have another Middle Eastern war was not politically sustainable. I thought the only way we could ensure our security is to make sure we use the economic power of the United States to denuclearize Iran. And when you say that is not possible, these are crazy mullahs. They are actually, I would say they are Persians. With the Persian culture being so long and storied, they're not utterly irrational. You can actually exert pressure on that to achieve a result. If you choose the easy way out, you do the Neville Chamberlain thing, which is giving the dictator everything he wants. You actually ensure that war is more likely. And making sure that that is not going to be part of our future is what I've been working so hard in.
Okay, and just talking about what's going on this week at Camp David, 4 of the 6 invited Gulf rulers declined to attend the summit. Can you talk a little bit about our regional allies there and how they fall into this?
The president struck out with our Arab allies and shows that he is perceived too much in Riyadh and Amman or Cairo as a friend of Iran, and as fellow Muslims, they know Iran, how dangerous it is, and they don't want to deal with the United States, which is politically allied with Iran. And they made the weird decision, I would say. The ultimate invite in international politics is an invite to Camp David with a sitting U.S. president. Think about 1945, when the U.S. was astride the entire world and was the preeminent military power and the only one armed with nukes. If the leader of that country wants to talk to you, every single country would immediately show up. Just think you're going to get some tired NSC talking points about how great the Iranians are, or something the Arab heads of state said they didn't want to go through. Rational choice.
Okay. And going back to earlier this spring, what influence do you think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Congress had on your perception of the deal?
It really helped us, those of us who really don't oppose the Iranian agreement. The Prime Minister wisely said that the Iranian agreement is not blocking a path to a bomb. It's a highway to a bomb. To have the best friend of the United States, a fellow democracy, lay out the case so clearly was influential. And the reason why the president didn't want him to come is because he would strengthen the Congress's backbone against the Iranian agreement. I would say, think about it. The Senate has now voted 98-1 and 400-24 on the issue. Nearly every member of Congress or Democrat has opposed the president on this issue. We should wake up and see why is there no congressional support for President Obama on this issue. The reason why is because we are correctly seeing the mistakes being made.
Okay, and then just with regards to the nuclear agreement, do you think that if it occurs, that this is going to encourage or discourage Gulf Arab states to get nuclear weapons? How do you view it playing out in the region?
I have long said that the Pakistanis have probably served the Hertz rent-a-car of nuclear weapons. They're waiting for a call from Riyadh, who largely paid for their nuclear program. And when the Saudis call over and say, hey, why don't you send over those nukes to us that we paid for, the Pacs will probably do that. And we will see a number of nuclear powers rise in the Gulf. I will tell you coldly and calculatingly as a Navy intelligence officer, if you put nukes in a scenario where the United States Navy is ordered to protect the West's supply of oil, we cannot accomplish our mission there once nukes are present. And then you encumber a future admiral to come to the president to say, Mr. President, you may order my fleet in there. I'll just come back with ships full of bodies and will not achieve the military mission that you laid out for me. That means we have to ask for permission for the Persian Gulf oil from the Ayatollahs in Iran. That is a negotiated position that we should never put a future president of the United States in.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know we have a very smart audience that has lots of questions for you on this topic, so we'd like to throw...
I would ask that you act like you're from Highland Park, Illinois, and don't be shy. Yeah.
And we have a microphone for you, my colleague, so please raise your arm high and wait for the mic. We'll start right here, table 1 with Avi Porat, please. Avi, I don't think it's turned. Is it on?
Yes, Senator. I'm going forward a year or two. Some negotiation may fail, some negotiation may succeed. A year or two from now, we have not the Mandela situation, but the Korea situation. And Iran says, thank you very much, we have our first bomb, we're building our second. What should the United States do in this case?
Let me actually depress you totally after this talk. The Obama administration is preparing a success fee to the Iranians, of refunding $165 billion to the Iranians. And they will be absolutely awash. I understand that Ben Rhodes answered this question recently, saying kind of hilariously, the Iranians are going to spend the money on infrastructure, schools and roads and all that kind of. We know that they're going to spend it on more terror and more Hezbollah and more conquering of countries like Yemen or Lebanon. A key goal of mine is to make sure that $165 billion is not given to the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, the gentleman at table 4, please.
Thank you. My question has to do with continuing to stimulate the Europeans to participate in these programs that you're talking about eliminating, or about strengthening. It's hard enough for us to keep them with us as it stands. How are we going to do it in the future?
When you talk about our European allies, you got to talk about our French allies. They have expressed strong reservations to the United States about this path that we're on, because they realize that that Europe is going to have to rely on oil from the Persian Gulf, and they don't want to have to ask Iran for permission to get that oil. I think we should listen. This is strange for a Republican senator to say. I think we should listen to our French allies on this point.
Great, thank you. The gentleman in the back, please.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm supposed to be in Lebanon teaching graduate students right now, but because of the #1 terrorist country, Iran and Hezbollah, I can't go there. It's not safe. And there's a real concern that if the sanctions are lifted, they will park more and more missiles in Lebanon against Israel. And Hezbollah will be getting more money. And by the way, they're now active in this continent, Hezbollah and Iran. Our concern is, how are you going to stop the president working around you, going to the UN? And this is a major, major problem. As you know, the countries over there are very, very upset on our weak leadership and how we've abandoned the area. Thank you for what you had to say.
I have joked with my colleagues that on the strategy of the president to go to the UN Security Council, that he might put humorously, a resolution before the Security Council saying the Republican Party of the United States is a threat to his security. And I think if you put a resolution banning the Republican Party of the U.S. before the UN Security Council, they would instantly support it. We got to understand just who those cats are. They're really not in our interest. They are not our friends. I just was in New York recently. I watched the one-man show, Churchill, to get my inspiration up. I think we should learn the lessons from the #1 statesman of the 20th century, who I think is probably personally responsible for saving civilization. Anybody else?
Thank you. Yes, the question for the gentleman here at table 3, please.
Would you please discuss the use of military force, the probability of success now, in the future, and if you think at some point in time it might be better for a military strike than a nuclear-armed Iran?
The problem with a military strike is the small size of the Israeli Air Force. The Israelis, if they carried out the strike, would not be able to hit enough targets fast enough to make sure that they were totally disabled. In the case of the United States joining into another Middle Eastern war, I have not been for the U.S. taking military action, because I think following Iraq, the U.S. public is not ready for another Middle Eastern war. And the reason why I was so in favor of sanctions was to prevent the need for one, to use our economic power to make sure that Iran just gives up their nuclear power program. They stand between starvation and poverty and just choose to knuckle under to U.S. sanctions.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, Janet Tavakoli there, please.
Senator, thank you very much for your presentation. My question has to do with the sanctions, which were so effective, as you point out, in 2013. What would it take? What would have to change in Washington for us to be able to go at those sanctions again in the way that they were done prior to the easing?
What it would take is for the Obama administration to reimpose the Menendez-Kirk sanctions, gobbling up that $165 billion, making sure it never shows up in Iran. And I'll tell you the story of one bank in China that I heard about. It was called something like Pudong Bank, Shanghai. We were able to, they were the principal oil brokers for China buying Iranian energy and had an awful lot of Iranian currency on hand. We went to them and said, look, if you ever want access to the $14 trillion US economy, again, you will now freeze these Iranian reales accounts. We got about $5 billion per bank. When enough of those accounts were locked up, the black market lost confidence in the Iranian currency. That was that date in 2013 when I highlighted in the chart that you all have, when the pressure became too great for Iran to sustain, when they decided to come to the negotiating table.
Thank you. Next question. Yeah, right here, please, Mr. Bensinger, at the front table too.
Could you explain to me the rationale that's being used by the administration, the Obama administration, for refunding money to Iran? And the second sort of follow-up question to that is,
Remember,
do our quote, allies, the English and the French and the
remember,
Germans...
I am the #1 opponent of the Iranian agreement in the Congress. And oftentimes I'm asked to explain the president's rationale. I am not defending the president's rationale. Sometimes I have to talk about what's motivating him. In the case of this $165 billion about to go back to the Iranians, he desperately wants to make sure the press conference which he had in which he claimed that there was an agreement is not a lie. The success fee is to make sure that that press conference becomes a reality.
Do our allies agree with this idea of a refund?
I think, as I said, the French have serious reservations. And for President Hollande, he has been quite brave as a French politician to say, this is not a wise direction, because the French are, obviously, after the Charlie Hebdo experience, I would encourage you guys all to become subscribers to Charlie Hebdo, as I have been, to use the voice of our hotline to say after this terrorist attack that we cannot be silenced. We will back a kind of global idea of free speech.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, right over here. Jim Mabey, please.
In your approach, do you think it's a go it alone approach? Don't you need allies to agree to this in order to have it really executed and be successful? And if so, how do you get those allies on the team?
Actually, you know, when we first imposed Menendez-Kirk, we had to build a coalition. The economic size of the United States is so large, and the economic size of Iran is so small. If you put financial institutions in the position where they have to choose between both, the U.S. is always going to win. That's why the strategy was so successful in its initial phases.
Next question. Yes, in the back, please. Olivia.
If the support is so bipartisan for turning down the deal and keeping the sanctions in place, why was Corker's bill so watered down?
Bob wanted to get the president's signature. That's why it was watered down. And I was not interested in getting the president's signature. I worked very closely with AIPAC, who very much wanted a bipartisan result. And my key partnership with Bob Menendez was to make sure I had as many Democrats as possible with me, including Chuck Schumer, who's about to become the new Democratic leader.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, the woman right there, please, at table 4.
Yes, sir. Just a quick question without trying to pierce the intelligence. of it, does Israel have bunker buster type bombs and the capability to deliver them?
The irony of the administration's position, they have sold bunker buster to the Saudis, but not the Israelis. I would, over the long term, I would urge you all to carefully watch the government in Riyadh. That government, I don't think, is stably based. To have a monarchy sitting on top of that much wealth in that neighborhood means that we might have things like King's Die, which we recently have had, that if you base all U.S. security on the future hold on power by the Saud family, I think you're on a very thin reed.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, right there. There's an arm over there.
So I am from Highland Park, so I get to ask an aggressive question, I guess, but one that's factually based. It's my understanding that Prime Minister Netanyahu estimates that the Iranians are 2 to 3 months away from a nuclear weapon.
I'll correct you. That is Secretary Kerry that testified before the Senate.
Fair enough, so we can stipulate that.
Yeah.
If an agreement is made, it's going to be agreed by not only the U.S., but the P5+1, which includes Russia and China. So if the U.S. is seen as quashing that deal, I guess the question there is, what does that do to our relationship with those countries, which is currently contentious and the own issues with that. But what would prevent Iran at that point from developing a nuclear weapon immediately, which would put giving them a nuclear weapon, let's say, by the end of the year?
I think the intelligence has not showed that the Iranians have decided to actually assemble and test a weapon. That's a big political decision that's probably very complicated. Let's look at the intelligence side of the issue. For a nuclear weapon, it's a really complicated thing to build. You're going to need an industrial empire, a little bit like the Manhattan Project. In the case of various institutions, many of which we know of, they have to talk to each other when they say, you know, where is the plutonium pit? Where are the explosive lenses? I have tested them, and here they are. Here are the results of my testing. We haven't picked up that kind of chatter showing a firm political decision by the Iranians to assemble a weapon. So it does appear that the political decision has not been made. And that's a good thing, probably because of all the pressure that we have put on.
Thank you. Right here, please. Bob Asher in the front.
Senator, we know that we think we know that an agreement is going to be signed. It seems that the president is willing to concede all along the line.
I would caution you in saying I do not think of the agreement is going to be signed. That last slide that I had showed that the president jumped too early. There are basic things that have not been worked out between both sides. To say there's an agreement is to say that there is something there. I would say, you know, given the sanctions relief differences and the military site differences, there's not an agreement which is present. There was a time when the administrations would send out feelers to the Senate saying, what do you guys think of this as an oral agreement? You know, so many people were laughing in the Senate. Think about something so big and so important being only based on oral understandings. Anybody in business would never rely on an oral understanding. That I would say there is humorously, I would say, Kirk's informal rule of dictators who hate the U.S., they always screw up, like Hitler and the Ayatollahs. We have to look in deep. Why does Iran want a nuclear weapon? They are absolutely convinced, once they have a working device, that their security against the United States is solid. That, in their eyes, means they have to have a working nuclear weapon. they look to North Korea as the example of where they want to go. In the polling that I have seen, it's about 72% of Iranians have answered the question that they support the nuclear program of Iran. That I would say that remember the Green Revolution, where the regime almost lost power. The regime is absolutely dependent on a crisis atmosphere with the West. It needs to keep generating crisis feelings, like their hilarious ballet where they built a model aircraft carrier. By that, I don't describe something you can get in a hobby shop. It was a couple of football fields long, built on a barge. They towed it out into the Persian Gulf. They shot a Chinese missile at it, and it missed. Kind of hilarious for them. This is the regime that we're dealing with.
Well, Senator, respectfully, I think there's going to be an agreement. I think that both sides, the Iranians see a benefit, the obvious benefits to them in getting legitimacy, and the United States doesn't seem at this point to be unwilling to concede almost every issue. And I think there will be an agreement.
Let me, Bob, I'll generally agree with you. The reason why there's probably more weight on the side of an agreement is because of that $165 billion. When that money comes home to Iran, imagine Rouhani will probably get a cut, so will Javad Zarif, so they will become phenomenally wealthy in their own right. Of course they will want to say yes.
Well, under those circumstances, then, how the Corker Menendez or Corker Cardin bill only gives a venue to the Congress to discuss the Iranian issue over these next several months. Even if...
Yeah, thanks. Do you have a comment on that, Senator?
Sure. I would say as Corker Cardin rolls forward, we look like we will have other votes on Iran. Think about this, the president's signature foreign policy issue, which nearly every member of his own party has voted against him because it doesn't play in Peoria. And as a representative of Peoria, I will tell it definitely doesn't play in Peoria.
So obviously, Senator Kirk, we have lots of views in the room of what will happen on June 30th. Can you play out what you think will happen over the next 6 weeks and then following afterwards?
Under Corker Cardin, we have the resolution of disapproval, which will come to the Senate floor whenever Mitch McConnell wants it to come forward. I will be working carefully with Mitch and Bob to pick the best time, and we'll watch Iranian behavior and remind members of what the Iranians have been up to. We'll watch the payment of the success fee and look at the trend of Iranian domination of the Middle East and see how they tighten their grip on Baghdad and Sana'a.
And at home here, if the agreement doesn't go through at the end of June, what do you see playing out then and over the summer?
My guess is the Obama administration will arrange for the success fee to be paid to Iranian accounts controlled by key members of the Iranian delegation, to make sure that they see all that money and power flowing through their hands.
Okay.
And get to yes. With $165 billion, you can pay for a lot of yeses.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, I see a hand over there, please.
I just wanted to make sure I understand some of what you're saying today about Russia and China and our relation with them. And if these negotiations fail, you're suggesting that America can go it alone in terms of economic sanctions while Russia and China resume trade with Iran, and that doesn't lead immediately almost to the development of nuclear weapons in Iran.
Let me segue to the Chinese view. I have founded the China Working Group in the Senate. My top goal is to gather friendly script where we're going to make O'Hare the most Chinese-friendly airport in North America to make sure that we are linked to that enormous economy. I just met with the chairman of McDonald's, who said that he has 2,000 restaurants in China right now. I want to make sure that link between Chicago and China is done. In the case of the Chinese, I will tell you, 11% of their energy comes from Iran. They have been pretty nervous about the Ayatollahs, thinking of the Ayatollahs as maybe too unstable to bet the future of their country on. The key issue for the Chinese leadership is the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party, which is based on the economic growth that they have been able to deliver to the country. In this case, the Ayatollahs are somewhat of a threat to that economic growth. If China ever has a real problem with her energy supply, then China could go into recession. How does the Communist Party hang on when it's not delivering phenomenal economic growth to its people? Nobody can answer that question.
Thanks. Any more questions from the audience? Well, if not, we will thank you so much, Senator Kirk, for coming back to the Chicago Council and for sharing our views with, for sharing your views with us.
Thanks,
we're very
everybody.
grateful, and we're adjourned. Thank you.